Hello, 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 and welcome to this session on scene filtering for dLive and Avantis. We're going to be talking about all the different things you can do with scenes, all the different things you can tell the console not to do with scenes, and how they interact. We're going to primarily be focusing on dLive, but almost everything I'm going to be talking about today is going to be applicable to both dLive and Avantis. If you do have any questions, by all means, put them in the chat and I'll bring them up on screen and we'll be able to talk about them. If we do try and keep the questions directed predominantly at dLive and Avantis, as those are the things I know about. But if we do have any other questions, I'll do my best to answer them too. So let's have a look at dLive Director, where the scenes are, what scene filtering is, and what our options are. So this should look familiar to most of you. I would imagine this is dLive Director 1.88. Oh, I see you've got some comments coming in already. So hi Tedster, hi Slow Beats. Morning Samantha, morning Dustin. Hi Elvis from Flensburg, Germany. Can I explain embedded recall? I will explain embedded recall, Richie. Thank you for asking. But for the minute, we're just going to have a quick overview about where the scene system lives, what it's for, what you can do with it. So let's go. We've got our own button here on the right-hand side. So if you're in front of a physical surface, you'll see an actual button labeled scenes. On Avantis, it'll be on the left-hand side in the context menu. So this is what we're presented with. In fact, let me make this a little bit bigger. Let's go ahead and turn up the size of our interface. We'll give that just a moment. There we go. We should be able to see a little bit better now. So this is the scenes menu, and this is the default factory show with the default scenes on the left there. So on dLive, the general workflow is that you'll load your show. You'll load a template show, and for every template show, we give you some strip assignments for all the different surface sizes, so you've got somewhere to start with. So let's say that we've got our show set up. We have all these other scenes to play with. So what is a scene? Well, a scene contains a number of different saved parameters. These will be things like, in fact, we can go through and see exactly what they are in the recall filter. So these are the things that are in a scene. And whenever you see it save a scene, no matter what the recall filter is set to do, it will save all of these values. The best way of controlling what scenes do is the recall filter. And the recall filter, along with the global save filter and even the role filter, will decide which of those parameters that are saved in the scenes are recalled. So let's have a look at the sort of things we've got. So we have top level things. So we have inputs in groups of 12. We have processing, routing, direct out, DCA, name and color level, all those sort of good things. And some of these things we can dig down into. So you can dig down and see that there are individual things for the preamp, trim, stereo image, PQ, compressor, delay, etc. So we can go down to quite a fine granular level of detail and decide what's going to be recalled and what isn't. So there are three different places you can filter your scene recalls. You can filter your scene recall on a by scene basis using the recall filter. We can also use the global safes. Now the global safes, as the name kind of suggests, affect everything, all scenes equally. So if you want to make sure, for instance, that the, I don't know, input to gate is never affected by any scene recall, no matter what the scene recall, you can go into your global safes and safe the gate. Some of these are done by default. So for instance, by default, we don't recall soft key assignments, and we don't recall our IP controller configs. This is because by default, we just think this is something that someone wouldn't expect to be recalled by a soft key. There are some other options in here, such as the source selector, talkback settings, that kind of thing. But all these can be turned off. You can recall absolutely all these things in a scene if you want to by going through and deselecting it from the global safes. We also have these handy buttons up here, which is Safe None and Safe All. So if you want to start from a place of having everything saved and just choose the things you want to be recalled, you can do that too. Pet2's here. He's got some questions. He says, questions for later. Okay, we can talk about timecode and scenes a little bit later on. That's absolutely fine. Remind me if I don't come back to that. So let's have a little look at the scene manager. So the scene manager, you have all your scenes on the left. You can do all the standard things that you'd expect to be able to do, like stores, deletes, goes, recalls, that kind of thing. And we have some other tabs up here. So we have scene update. So for those of you who are not familiar with scene update, say you have 10 different scenes with different values in, different things going on, and your bassist turns up his amp a little bit more than he usually does. Scene update is a great way to do mass editing of lots of scenes. So you might, for instance, have a bassist who's got his amp turned up too much. You might pull that down 3 dB in your show. You might go, actually, kind of want that to propagate against all my scenes because that amp's not going to come down for the duration of the show. You can go ahead, you can choose the scenes that you want to record. So I haven't got any set up at the moment, but let's say I want to do all of them. I can either scope manual, and you get a update scope that's very, very similar to the recall filter, where you can go in and choose the specific thing. Or if you go ahead and hit auto, I'm in scene update mode now. If I go ahead and do auto tracking, it will notice the things you touch and update whatever it is you touch. There's a couple of other cool tricks in here. So we've got absolute and relative mode. So if that bass level is being ridden throughout your scenes, maybe it's at plus 2 dB in one scene, it's at unity in another scene, it's at minus 5 dB in the next scene. If you push your fader up 2 dB in relative mode, it will add 2 dB to each of those values. If you're using absolute mode and your fader ends up at 2 dB, it will just overwrite those values with 2 dB. So you can be quite clever with how you use it depending on what the use case is. Yes, and then you have an update, apply, etc. As we move along, we've got the cue list editor. So cue lists are fantastic if you don't always run your shows in the same order every night. So you can go through and choose your scenes. Let me name some scenes. Let's call this one opening, and our next one is going to be song 1, and our next one is going to be song 2. It's a very short show because after song 2 we've got close. So there are scenes. Let's put some information in them. You can see as I'm storing and going through, I'm getting a tick. So the tick shows that that scene is not empty and has some information in it. And there are some other icons available here. So we can see this little filter, like a coffee filter, that shows that there's a recall filter on that scene. And we also have the little lock, which shows that we can't edit it without unlocking it first. Handy if you want to make sure that people are really thinking about it before they make changes to a scene. So we've got our 4 scenes. If I go in my cue list editor, I might make a new cue list. So this is my new cue list on the right. So we might have our normal show where we go opening, song 1, song 2, close. And I might save that and I'll call that standard show. But we might have a different show one day. And our different show might go opening, song 2, close, and then we come out and do song 1 as the encore. And that's fine too. And we can save that as a cue list. And we can call this backwards show. There's our backwards show, and now we can quickly switch between them by going, oh, here's our standard show, and we can quickly go back to our weird show, backward show. Just by quickly making cue lists, you can see how you can make different orders for different shows. Sorry about that. So you can have different orders for different shows. You can manage these. So we can put these on USB keys. We can take these between different. Consoles. Sorry about that. We can go ahead and import scenes too. So import scene is really, really helpful if we decide that we want to do things like bring in a guest show file. Import scene is particularly useful if you're using the console to do things like run a small festival stage, and maybe you don't have some sort of matrix mixer. Maybe you don't have some sort of alternative, console. Maybe that one console is doing all the jobs. And if in between artists, you go ahead and load that show file and your audio is going to stop, that might stop any walk-in music or continuity mic or something like that. So scenes and scene import is really, really useful because you can import something from another show. So let's see what shows I've got on here. Jack Show SC, that'll do. So if I load up this show, invalid show version, great. Okay, let's make a new one. So we've got our scene manager. This is our normal show that we've got. And I'm going to save this show as normal show. Now, we might have another show. We might be guest engineers. We might be a guest act going into someone else's setup. So let's load the front of house show. Load the front of house show and see how we might import our scenes and bring our show into the front of house show and into somebody else's setup. I'll give that just a minute to recall. Let's have a look at the chat while we have a moment. Richie says, scene update is really useful. Yes, it is. If you have a scene store on a soft key, does it still work when the scene is locked? That's a very good question that I don't know the answer to. So we can look into that in a minute. If anyone else has any other questions, then more welcome to put them in the chat. We're going to take a couple more minutes to go through importing scenes, and then we're going to get down into the nitty-gritty of scene filtering. If there's anything anyone would particularly like to know about scene filtering, maybe people have got a specific query or something they'd specifically like to talk about or see, and then let me know and we can go through that. Okay, so our show is reloaded now. We're going to recall our standard strip assignment, which is the 1500. And we're going to look how we bring those 4 scenes that we made before into this show. Well, we can do that. We're going to import. We can select the show we just saved called normal show. And when this loads, we'll have those scenes, and those scenes will appear on the right-hand side. So now we have our current show on the left, and we have the show we just made on the right. So I'm going to go ahead and drag in those scenes from that show. And now we go to our scene manager, they're all available here. Now, if I'm, maybe the festival engineer or the engineer for the hire company, or maybe even the venue engineer, I might have loads of things set up on my auxes that I don't want changing. Maybe I've got my graphic EQs for my wedges set, and I don't want this touring show to come in and ruin that lovely setup that I've got going. So we can go in and restrict what these scenes recall when we call them. So if we go to the recall filter here, we've got all these options. Now, there are 2 ways of approaching this. We can either go through and find the individual things that we don't want recalling. So if we did that, we'd maybe, let's talk specifically about outputs. If we go into our mixes, now, yeah, touring engineer can have the groups, that's fine. But maybe our wedges have got important things on it that we don't want to be lost. So we go into our processing, and we want to block the processing from recalling. We might want maybe the mute, the level. Maybe they can have the name, or maybe the name's really important. Maybe we've got, upstage left, downstage left, and they've got the names of their artists. We don't know who they are. So that's no good to our patch team. And we can go in and do more. So maybe we've got stereo matrices. We don't want them messing with any of the outputs. So we can go ahead and block those things from being recalled. The other way we could do it is to go into the recall filter. Dustin says, what does Dustin say? It says, if you're importing scenes, you need to have one with the entire console allowed in the scope. You don't have to have one with the entire console allowed. You can import the scenes and do individual things to them. You don't have to have all of anything. So one of the other things we can do is we can block everything and say, okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and let you have your input channels. Maybe you can have the drums. I've had it before one time when we had a house kit on stage, and the artist that was bringing an engineer was going to use the house kit, and he said, as I was doing the scene import, he said to me, "Oh, it's a shame. Normally I like to be lazy and steal everyone's gate and EQ settings." And I was like, "Oh, that's fine. We could go ahead and block those updates on the drums, so maybe the first 8 to 10 channels, or how many channels of drums you've got, and we can be really specific. So we can go ahead and say, right, well, I'm going to go ahead and recall your settings on all the other inputs, but we're going to go ahead and keep the drums." Dustin said, if you wanted your whole show to come over. I don't understand your question. So if you could rephrase it, I'll do my best to answer. If you wanted your whole show to come over, there are a couple of different options. You could do global saves. If you've got to import lots and lots of scenes, which was the next thing I was going to come on to, is say we've got this recall filter set, and we go, right, that's the recall filter we want. Maybe there's like 30 scenes or something. We can go ahead and copy that filter really quickly to all the other scenes. So it's a real fast way. You set it up once and you can copy that filter to all the other scenes, and then and then that's on all the other scenes. Regarding the console scope, so on the global safes will only affect scenes. If you recall a show, that show will have its own global safes. So a show will always be able to recall everything. If you want to do sort of like a partial recall, you need to do it on a scene by scene basis. So the best way of doing that is to do the import scene function, set up your recall filter once, and recall your filters from there. The reason I suggest doing a recall filter on a scene by scene basis rather than doing a global safe is you might want to have scenes that do recall those functions set up, or do recall other functions that you wouldn't necessarily want somebody who's just brought their show in to be able to recall. So you might have a scene that turns on and off the matrices, or does some sort of, level change to the matrices. Now, any touring artist and touring engineer isn't going to have those settings dialed in. That's going to be something that you will do as the house engineer. Equally, one of the other things I have done in theatre shows, which I recognize the crossover between bringing some scenes into a theatre show isn't that much, but just, as a logical little thought game, one of the things I sometimes do with theatre shows is set up a bright preset for the surface illumination and a dark preset for the surface illumination. The benefit here is that because you can recall scenes from MIDI on a scene by scene basis, you can actually plumb that into the lighting console. So I've done shows before when the lighting console goes into a blackout, it brings up my scene, my dimmed scene. Now, my console doesn't all turn off, but it will go dark blue. The level will come right down. It means that I can still see when the rest of the theater goes into blackout. And it means that anyone sat behind me is not being blinded by my lighting console. And all that timing is done nicely with the rest of the lights. So there are loads of really, really clever things you can do. You might want to have a soft key that performs a single function. So you might want, for instance, a soft key. I don't know, let's have a look at some options here. You might want a soft key, well, surface illumination we've talked about. I guess you might want a soft key that does ganging. Other sort of things that we see people do a lot, if they run out of soft keys, if they are a very soft key heavy show, you can have a soft key that does nothing but change the soft keys. So let's have a look how that would work. Let's set up 2 scenes, and in my first scene, soft key 2 is going to be a select key. Soft key 2 is going to select channel 1. That's what we're going to do. Let's say select input 1. And we're going to save this as bank A store. We're going to go to surface, and we're going to change this to mix input 1 as soon as I can find it. There we go. Mix input 1. And we're going to store that as a scene and call that bank B store. So there's a couple of things we need to do here. We need to thanks Val. So there's a couple of different things we need to do here. We need to have a look at our global saves, and then we also need to go through and have a look at our recall filter, because we don't want these scenes to recall anything else. What we do want to do is allow those scenes to okay, sorry, very confusing the way it shows replies to yourself on the chat screen here. Anyway, so what we do want to do is go into our global safes and allow those soft keys to be updated. So we're going to go ahead and allow all of them to be updated in the global safe. And we now need to go into our scene for bank A, for bank B, and update the recall filter. Now, in this case, we only want this scene recall to do one thing. We want it to update the soft keys. So I'm going to go ahead and do block all. I'm going to go into my soft keys, and I'm going to allow. So the only thing that this recall filter will do is update the soft keys, and we've allowed it in the global safe. I think Heath came up with the best sort of analogy for the filter system, which is it's like layers of Swiss cheese. There are 3 different levels that any recall can be blocked on. There's the recall filter on the scene, there's the global safe, and there's the roll safe. And you've got to make sure, if you want something to happen, that it's okay at every one of those different levels, or every one of those 3 levels. And only if it's unblocked, only if it's unsafe at every one of those levels will the change happen. So in this case, I've gone into my recall filter and made sure that my soft keys are not recall safe. And I've gone into my global safes and I've ensured that they're not global safed. In this instance, I'm not using multi-surface, so there's no necessity for me to go into the roll filters. So we've done that for bank A. I'm going to go ahead and take our recall filter and we're going to copy it to bank B. The other thing we need to do is update the soft key. So if we, well, let's test them first. So if we go on bank A, what we should have is 2 does the select on channel 1. If I go on bank B and I press the same soft key, that's now a mix button. Now we can go ahead and take this one step further and have a soft key do this toggling for us. So if we go into bank A and recall it, we want soft key 1 to swap us to bank B. So I'm going to go ahead and do that by going to surface, going to soft keys, going to soft key 1, and we're going to go into our scene controls, which are there. Specific scene recall. Now we're in bank A, so we want it to recall bank B. Press OK. Let's recall bank B. And now we're in bank B. We want scene soft key 1 to, I don't know if I saved it. Maybe I didn't save it. That would be very silly. We want soft key 1 to do scene control, specific scene. We want that to recall bank A. And this time I'm going to store. I'm going to recall bank 1. No, I didn't save it. Very silly. So we'll do that again. We'll go surface. We'll go channel 1, function. We want to go to scene recall, scene controls, scene function, specific scene recall. We're going to recall bank B. So slightly confusing, I will accept. Store. So what we have here is a scene that changes all the soft keys to one set of soft keys and a scene that changes them the other to the other set. So we have basically 48 soft keys, and then we've gone one step further and we've decided that the soft key at the top, and you can put this anywhere, is the one to change these. Hang on, Dustin sent a chat in. It's quite a long one. What I was getting at was if I say I have a song by song scenes just recalling basic effects and maybe fade and mute, and I want to import my show into somebody else's show, I'd have the first scene with everything allowed. Otherwise, oh, it's actually run out. Otherwise, none of my other channel parameters would come over, right? Oh, okay, I see what you're saying. Yes. So you'd have one scene to recall your channel parameters, and then you'd recall filter much more deeply for the other ones if they're just doing mutes. Yeah, absolutely. Unless those other scenes also had those settings in which case you could just leave all of them fairly open. But yes, you could absolutely do that. You could almost have a setup scene that has its recall filter much more open, and then have a much more strict recall filter for the rest of the scene. So you can have recall filters that are very stringent and only allow, as you say, an effect change, a mute, and a fader position. That's absolutely fine. So looking back on this setup, the thing we haven't talked about is if you do open up that global safe, now all the other recall filters will change those soft keys too. So if I was to go into my normal scene and recall song 1, we'd now see that these soft keys no longer do what we thought they'd do. And that's because song 1 in its recall filter oh no, it does have soft keys blacked off. I was too clever. I was trying to set up a situation in which it didn't work so I could fix it. And what I've actually done is done it properly from the start, which isn't what I meant to do. So if we were to forget to block our soft keys, because by default, the soft keys should be blocked by the global safes, but we've now opened that up so any of the scenes can recall it. So if we call song 1, and now use these, it doesn't do what we expect it to do. because it's opening the recall filter. So what I'm really saying is if you do decide to do anything clever, which involves opening up the global safes of over and above their default settings, then the important thing to do is to go through and make sure that you go into the recall filter for each scene and add any blocking that you require to make sure that not all of the scenes are recalling the soft keys, for instance. Now would be a good time for some questions. I saw that pair 2 had a question. Hi, Jack. Questions for later. Now is later. What is the main reason for the fact that faders don't move with fade time when changing scenes? 2, when will you release an option to fire scenes with timecode, LTC or MTC? Cheers. Okay, so there are 2 questions there. And the first question is, why don't the faders move when changing scenes? Or why don't they fade and move when changing scenes? It's really simple. dLive does not have touch-sensitive faders. So if your scene is moving, if you're changing scenes and you have a fade time, let's say that you have a 2 or 3 second fade time, the audio fades over those 2 or 3 seconds, but the faders will snap to position. And that's essentially because if during those 3 seconds you grab one of those faders, if it's fading smoothly from position to position and you grab it, you're not going to be able to affect the audio. Nothing will change for the full duration of those 3 seconds. So if something's really, 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 really loud and you need to pull that channel down, you can't, because that fade is happening and the fader has no way of knowing if you're touching it or if that resistance that it's feeling is maybe a worn track or some dirt in the fader. So the reason we do the snap to position during scene changes is because once it's arrived at that position, if you take it, if you put your finger on it, it will pull that channel out of the fade and you can continue to mix on it. You can pull it down, you can push it up, whatever needs to happen. If we did have the faders move, say you had a long fade time, say it was like 10 seconds, that would be 10 seconds you couldn't make any changes to any of the fader positions because the console has no way of knowing. Now, we have other consoles that do have touch-sensitive faders, and potentially, hopefully in the future, something we'll be able to do is have the faders move smoothly, and the console notice, if your finger touches it, then it'll pull that fader out of the fade. But at the moment, we thought that was the best compromise, and that the faders don't move, even though the audio is fading, and it means that once it arrives at its position, you can take over manual control if you need to. The second question is, when will you release an option to fire scenes with timecode? There are no current plans to have any sort of timecode integration with dLive. That's not to say that we would never do it, just that at the current moment, it's not something we're looking into. There are lots of options if you want to fire scenes with timecode of using some sort of intermediary, QLab being the one that comes to mind. You can certainly have QLab fire off MIDI scenes at a dLive based on timecode stamps. Yeah, not saying we won't do it, just saying it's not top of the list at the moment. I recognize that might be frustrating for people who particularly want to get involved in timecode. Cool. I'll continue to move on unless anyone has any more questions. We can have a little bit of a look at some other options, some other things involving scenes, and we might have a quick look at the roll filter and how that works. Cool. I shall continue. So we've had a look at embedded recall. That's what we can talk about. So embedded recall allows you to recall multiple scenes with one press. You can also recall scenes on other units. So if you have multiple consoles on a network, you can use embedded recall. Now, at the moment, I've only got a dLive on my network, but you can use dLive to also recall scenes on things like AHM. So if you're working in some sort of fairly fixed setup, maybe you've got a theatre show that's in for a long time, maybe it's an arts centre, maybe on a cruise ship, something like that. You can use your opening scene on dLive to fire off a scene on an AHM. And if you don't know, AHM is it's predominantly aimed at the install market. It's a matrix mixer. And you could use the opening scene on your dLive to have the AHM change inputs to whatever your dLive inputs are. Maybe you're going to send some audio to it over Gigarace or Dante or something like that. So you could use your opening scene on dLive to change, for instance, all of the say you had some matrices around the building, you could quickly have those change from playing a bit of background music to whatever's happening in the live room. Samantha's piped up at the mention of AHM. Samantha, I forget her actual proper job title, but Samantha is heavily involved in AHM, particularly in the US for us, and is in the chat. So you could do things like embedded recalls and recall stuff on other units. As I mentioned, AHM, you could get it to do things like unmute your mains. You could get it to pull the bar from having background music to having music from the show, all sorts of clever stuff. And you could also do it at the other end of the show as well, or during intermissions. All sorts of clever things can be done. Embedded recalls can also be used locally if you want to recall a number of scenes together or with delays in between them. So I've seen embedded recalls done for things like if you've got stuff that you usually do together, if you've got things that often happen at the same time or often happen in very short sequence, but you want the option to only do, Samantha says her proper title is Empress of Install. If you've got things you usually do together, but maybe not always, maybe you want the flexibility of doing them individually or skipping a step. So this might be stuff like at the start of the show, unmuting all of your head mics. Well, actually, maybe you don't want to unmute all of them. Maybe one of them's not working. Maybe one of them's got some RF issues. So you don't want that to happen with all your other jobs at the start of the show. So whilst normally you could use an embedded recall, if we have a look at how that would work, we would go ahead and add scenes to our recall. So let's say that we've got our opening and we're going to add song 1. Because our opening is, let's say in this example, our opening is playback. Maybe our opening is 30 seconds of playback, and then it goes immediately into song 1. And that's always the same because it's tracked, it's on a click, it's playback. So we can go ahead and add song 1. What will happen now? Oh, did I do that right? Yeah, what will happen now is I'll press go on opening. And after about 30 seconds, and I probably should have made it shorter for the purpose of this video, you'll see that it will recall song 1. So I'll just keep talking for a bit and we'll see that that happens in the background in a few moments. Now, if you've got a very heavily scened show, and I know that there are people out there that run shows without engineers for sort of arts clubs, cruises is the good example. Cruises are often heavily scened and heavily automated. You might press go at the start of the show, and it might, there we go, you can see it's now gone on to song 1, and it might just happily work its way through those scenes, work its way all the way to the end of the show, or maybe to an intermission. There are different ways of achieving that. You could do that in the console using the recall, using embedded recall. You could also use something external to the console. QLab was the example I gave earlier. There are other ones available, but I think QLab's the thing that most people use. You can recall individual scenes with MIDI commands and time-code it all up that way. We can also have each scene output custom MIDI if you want to use the console to control something external instead of something external controlling the console. So all of these are different options for different types of automation. But moving back to sort of the main thrust, the main topic of conversation for this presentation, the benefit of having recall filters is you can scope down, you can filter down right to individual things. So if you want to have an external device send a MIDI trigger to unmute an individual thing, maybe you've got some playback. Maybe you've got some playback and this playback device plays not all the time, but sometimes, and you want, when that playback is fired, maybe from QLab, for the channel to unmute itself and go up to a specific level, then you could, for instance, go down and have that set up. So you can have an individual scene that unmutes channel 61 and sets it to a specific level, and you can recall that with a specific MIDI command. So there's lots and lots of really, really powerful tools involved in the recall filter system that allows you to make not just scenes in the theater sense where you're recalling everything, you're recalling microphones, you're recalling levels, or maybe you just want to recall one channel. Maybe, I mean, I mentioned the drums thing earlier. At smaller festivals, I am definitely guilty of having a scene that resets my house drums gates and compressors and things to a known sort of okay level. So I know if I'm running out of time on that changeover, I can press a button or go into one scene, and it will set my drums up to be close. They won't be great, they won't be perfect, but it'll be close. And that might be recalling the level, the preamp value, the phantom, the gates, the compressors, and a bit of EQ. And that's like, what, 6 or 7 different things? But it's 6 or 7 different things on maybe 12 channels, and everything else I'll have recall. Samantha has made a point. She says, recall filters unlock so much power on the console/AHM. You're able to get so granular and do such specific tasks or change nearly everything, plus controlling third-party equipment. Lots of fun to explore through. Absolutely. Absolutely. The other thing that I find really helpful if I'm a festival engineer and I'm running mostly from a festival patch is I might go ahead and build, I might do my band or whatever band, and the lines that I've got, DIs 1 through 6, well, 1 and 2 might be keys and 3 might be guitar. So I might go ahead and name them. And then when I get to the end of that set and I want to recall it for the next band, and I want to get back to my generic festival patch names, well, I might go into my recall filter, block everything except, get out of this, except name and color for my inputs. Like I might want to be able to come back really quickly to my generic, kick in, kick out, guitar left, guitar right, not Nathan Vox A or whatever, or whatever the appropriate thing is for that artist. I might want to really quickly get back to just those channel names. So I can do that. I can have my recall filter. I can recall scope down to just name and color. So that's all it recalls if that's what I want. I like making notes in the description box, exactly what I've programmed, so I don't lose track later on. Yeah, I am very, very much guilty of not doing that. As you can see, just during this little chat, I've made 2 scenes that I haven't even named. So yeah, slap on the wrist for me, quite right. You've got the description, you've got the name, you've got the cross filter options. The other thing you can do if you don't want people to mess with it is you can lock it, as we discussed earlier. It's not like massively secure, although I think you can secure it further in the user profiles if that's something you want to do to make sure people can't lock and unlock your scenes. But it does just mean there's an extra press involved in doing anything like storing over it or changing it. Dustin says, what's the max wait time? That's a very good question. Let's go to embedded. 4 minutes. 4 minutes is the max wait time. If you like to stack them, you could, in theory, have a scene recall that's filtered to do nothing and stack your 4 minutes. Although I'm not quite sure what you'd be doing. I'm not 100% sure what you'd be doing if you needed more than that. I guess if you wanted to automate your entire show and you had some sort of intermission that was half an hour, then that might be a good idea. You could stack your delays that way. Does anyone have any other questions? Because if not, I might start thinking about bringing this to a close. But we've talked about imports, we've talked about global saves, we've talked about updates, we've talked about Scene Manager and what you can do with it. By the way, the queue list that we talked about earlier, just at the top here, you can change between going from all scenes to the current queue list. Obviously, the queue list was in our other show, so we can go ahead and make a queue list here. So say as we discussed before, we had a bit of a backwards one. We could have opening, we could have song 2 and close. And save that as queue list A. When we go back to our scene manager, you'll now see that we've got these 3. And these 3 will now be the scenes that are used when you use either the physical scene buttons, if you've got a S-Class console, or I guess there are some on the C-Class, but there's less of them. But they're also the scenes that are referred to as next, previous, etc. When you're using soft keys to recall them. Well, thank you so much for coming to my little chat. I hope that's been informative. If you do have, just hoping to automate walking music. I mean, you can still automate walking music, but you might just stack quite a lot of 4 minutes. Sorry, Dustin. But thank you for coming. Thank you for coming to my little chat about scene filters. If you do have any other questions, you're more than welcome to contact us in the usual way, which is by going to support.alan-heath.com. You can also contact your local distributor, and you can find out who that is by going to alan-heath.com/where to buy. and that will tell you who the Alan Heath distributor is in your territory, who might be able to assist you in a more sensible time zone or even in your local language. We are available on Facebook and Twitter and all the usual things if you'd like to chat to us that way or via the support portal. We do try and hang around in some of the Facebook groups, and we're also on community.alan-heath.com, which is the absolute best place if you have any feature requests or things you would think we could do better. That is the place to talk to us about it. If anyone has any further questions about scene filtering, thanks, Samantha. If anyone has any further questions about scene filtering, then more than welcome to get hold of me there or anywhere else. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye for now.